Our gracious Father, thank you so much for today, the chance to spend time thinking about your purposes for our life. May your Holy Spirit be part of this audience, part of each individual as we want to learn more truth that is inspired by your Holy Spirit, and how you led by example. May we learn those same examples of personal evangelism, using healing to promote health the natural way, and also to develop these friendships as people see you through our lives, so that they will have a hunger and thirst for Jesus in their life, just as he is shining in ours. We pray this all in your mighty name. Amen. All right. So I hope each of you has an outline. I thought we would start out with a program here that is practical. Let me stand up here a little bit better. So by practical, I mean I don't want to bore you with a lot of facts about things you've heard before. I want to make this more applied so that you can take this information and see yourself actually doing something with it, not just being academically enlightened. And so I have here, is my mic loud enough? Can everyone hear me back there? Okay. This is wireless? Okay. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. So this DVD set has 4 in there, and each DVD has 3 half-hour seminars on them. And it's David DeRose, who is on here. If you haven't heard him before, you'll see him today. And I think by having an understanding of what's on these DVDs, you will have a good grasp of the common diseases that you will encounter in your neighborhood. Diseases like diabetes, and today that's what we're going to focus on, one of the half-hour segments. And by taking the example of diabetes, I want to wrap LifeStart around that to show how LifeStart can turn around that disease and how you can share this information. One method, let's say you're a lay person, you don't have a medical degree, you don't feel like an expert in this area, and so you don't feel qualified that this is what you can do. Well, rather than to feel like you are needing to be an expert, you can simply point to those who are. You can be a facilitator, and by that you become a friend. Let's say you have a neighbor, or somehow you get in contact with somebody who has a disease, let's say diabetes for today's example, and you don't feel like you know everything about diabetes. This is one way to start. You can play this DVD for them, and then we'll go through this seminar directing you to some additional information in this outline, and at the end we'll talk about how to do it in a safe manner. At the very end we'll wrap it up, and then we'll have maybe 20 minutes of question and answer at the end, so you can hopefully address any of your concerns. So I thought by showing you an example of these DVDs, you'd get a sense for how you could spend an hour with that friend, half an hour watching the tape with them, or just leave it with them if that's fine. But they're going to have questions that arise from watching this, and by being familiar with what's on these tapes, then you can take those questions and turn it around into a learning experience. And Rob and I were going to role play some of that for you after the DVD plays. So let's go ahead and play the diabetes segment.
Welcome to Reverse Diabetes Naturally. I'm Dr. David DeRose, President of Compass Health Consulting, and your host for this exciting journey into simple things you can do to make a difference with diabetes. You might even be wondering, why speak about diabetes? How important is it? Well, no doubt if you've tuned in to this episode, you're thinking about this condition. Diabetes is indeed one of the leading metabolic conditions in the world. If you look at the statistics, diabetes is one of America's great epidemics. And it's largely due to rising numbers of individuals with what we call type 2 diabetes. Let's just stop right here and give a few definitions. I can remember in the old days when I was in medical school, there was no such thing as type 1 and type 2 diabetes. We spoke about children developing juvenile diabetes and adults having what? Adult onset diabetes. But those definitions, those terms, became actually confusing when we started finding young people developing what looked very much like the same type of diabetes we saw in adulthood. Thus, the name type 2 diabetes was assigned to the type of diabetes that occurs as a result of what we call insulin resistance. It's insulin not working the way it should in the body. We'll speak more about that in this presentation. On the other hand, the juvenile diabetes was given the designation type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune process typically. In other words, the body is attacking itself. In this case, it's attacking the islet cells or the beta cells, the producing cells in the pancreas that make insulin. Type 1 diabetes can actually occur in adulthood, although it's not as common. What we're seeing today is an epidemic in the Western world, like in the United States, that's being driven by diabetes of the type 2 variety. If you actually look at just how broad the scope of that epidemic is, it really is staggering. Some 25 million Americans have the condition. That amounts to 8% of the population. This actually represents a 26% increase from 2005. 7 million of those 25 million individuals are undiagnosed. You say, wait. How would we know how many people are not diagnosed with diabetes? Well, it's simply based on population data. For example, experts will do a screening event in some region, and they'll find that there are X number of people who have diabetes who didn't know it, and what that amounts to is about 27 to 30% of those who have diabetes are unaware that they have the condition. If you were to look at it in other ways, roughly 11% of Americans over 20 have diabetes, and by the time we get to the age of 65 and older, over 1/4 of the U.S. population have diabetes. As far as the impact of diabetes, there are different ways to calculate death statistics in the United States, but one way assigns diabetes as the 7th leading cause of death. At any given age, people with diabetes are about twice as likely to die as people who don't have the condition. There are human costs to diabetes that far transcend the numbers. Think about it this way. Even if someone does not die from diabetes, they're likely to have serious complications that affect their ability to live and to have high-quality existence from day to day. The most common diabetic complication is diabetic nerve damage, technically known as diabetic neuropathy. 60 to 70% of people with diabetes have mild to severe forms of nerve damage. Why this is so important is because it can influence sensation in the hands and feet. You might say, well, what difference does it make if I can't feel that well? Well, it can make a huge difference. One of the big problems with loss of foot sensation is increased risk for foot damage. And I'm thinking of things that may sound fairly innocuous if you're not a health professional, like a little sore on your foot. The problem is, a little sore that you're unaware of can become a big sore. And because in diabetes healing is often impaired, it's a little sore something that may seem insignificant that often sets the stage for foot and leg amputations. Other things that can be caused by diabetic neuropathy include digestive problems. After all, your digestive system is controlled by nervous input, nervous system input from the brain and also from what we call the autonomic or automatic nervous system. When that's not functioning properly, you can have digestive problems. Some of these nerve-related problems may not seem all that significant if you're not dealing with them, but I've had patients who couldn't work because of burning pain in their legs. I've had patients who could not sleep because of severe diabetic neuropathy symptoms. It's not just loss of sensation, you see, it's abnormal sensation as well. But come back to that impaired sensation equation and the connection with amputations. Are you aware that some 60 to 80,000 amputations occur each year in the United States because of diabetes alone? That's right, about 60% of all non-traumatic lower limb amputations are caused by diabetes. Well, nerve problems can affect quality of life, but so can vision. If you look at the leading cause of blindness among adults 20 to 74 years of age, you are looking diabetes square in the face. Some 12 to 24,000 new cases of blindness each year in America from diabetes. Diabetes, you see, causes damage to small blood vessels. If those small blood vessels are in the back of the eye, you will get something called diabetic retinopathy. Some 4.2 million Americans with diabetes over the age of 40 have significant diabetic neuropathy. 750,000 in that range, 2/3 to 750,000 people actually have retinopathy so bad that they are at significant risk of severe vision loss. Now, the good news, before we go much further, is simply this. Diabetic complications can be reversed. I have seen people with diabetic neuropathy have their neuropathic symptoms dramatically improve. I've seen people with diabetic retinopathy, eye problems, dramatically improve. Even diabetic nephropathy, kidney problems. Early on, there is some evidence that you could slow the progression, maybe even reverse it some. How do you do it? That's what we're talking about in this presentation. We're talking about reversing diabetes naturally. I'll just be honest with you. The foundation for reversing diabetes naturally is lifestyle. Lifestyle practices are powerful in reversing this disease state. If you've tuned in to any of our other presentations in the LifeStart series, you realize that there is a powerful mnemonic, a memory device, which is actually technically called an acronym that helps us remember 9 natural therapies, 9 natural strategies that can help us reverse a host of disease processes. Diabetes is included on that list. Before we go any further, speaking about diabetes, its reversibility and strategies, I want to just take time to help you see the big picture, and that is LifeStart. Let me just quickly walk you through the LifeStart elements. The L stands for liquids. Our choice of beverages has a role in diabetes, whether we develop it, if we have it, how well it's controlled. Liquids are important in diabetes. The I in LifeStart stands for interpersonal relationships. Being connected with other people is a powerful health-giving factor. It can help you with your diabetes. If you have social support, if you're socially connected with people, you will actually tend to do better with this condition. The F stands for foods. We're going to take a look at what dietary choices are the most important as far as reversing diabetes naturally. And then we have the E. E stands for exercise. Exercise is of vital importance as we're dealing with the diabetic state. Start, LifeStart, L-I-F-E, S is for sunshine. Let me tell you something interesting about sunshine, because we're not going to speak all that much about it in this presentation. Vitamin D is important actually in helping the immune system function optimally. One of the places in the world that is really challenged when it comes to sunshine is Scandinavia. Some years ago, they started giving children supplements of vitamin D, infants. And what they found is they were able to dramatically decrease the rate of type 1 diabetes. So, if you are making this connection, autoimmunity, type 1 diabetes, vitamin D has a role in it, and the sunlight is probably the single best way to make vitamin D. Problem is, if you live in Scandinavia or if you're stationed in Antarctica, you're not going to get much sunshine during the winter months. You need to take a vitamin D supplement. Let's move on with the LifeStart acronym. T stands for temperance. Temperance is the concept of doing good things in moderation, but totally avoiding those things that are harmful. We'll speak about that to some extent in this presentation. A is for air, fresh air. If you've heard me speak about this subject in other settings, you'll know the biggest pollutant as far as human health consequences is nothing that any factory does. It is cigarette smoke. If you're a smoker, you're exposing your body to chemicals that are actually impairing your entire metabolic picture, and diabetes is among the risk factors, that's right, of individuals that smoke. You're increasing your risk of that condition. Let's go on now. We've just got a few more elements in the acronym, then we'll come back and we'll give you a bigger picture. We've talked about life. We've talked about STAR for rest. Are you aware that if you're cutting yourself short on sleep, that you will ramp up your stress hormone levels? And as stress hormone levels go up, guess what? So do blood sugars. Higher stress actually puts you in a state that predisposes you to diabetes. I'll just be honest with you. I have seen patients with diabetes, and their main risk factor was undiagnosed. It was sleep apnea. That's right. If you have a problem with snoring, and you actually stop breathing at night, you may be oblivious to it, but have someone observe you. If you stop breathing at night, this is a hallmark of sleep apnea. That's actually what sleep apnea is. It means you stop breathing, or you have no breathing. A means without, pnea refers to breathing. And so when you stop breathing multiple times throughout the night, which is the characteristic of that sleep apneic state, your brain is arousing multiple times through the night. You may not wake up, but your sleep is interrupted, the stress hormone levels are higher, and that in and of itself can set the stage for diabetes. So adequate rest is important. That's just one illustration of it. And then the last point that I like to talk about is trust in divine power. I say it's the last point I like to talk about because there's a part of my life, a time in my life where I thought that there really was no spiritual being that was willing to guide us and help us. As a physician, I realize this is so important today. I've seen my patients get significant help from realizing that there is a loving Creator who wants to aid them in the process of lifestyle change. That's not what you believe? Listen, I have nothing to urge. I'm just saying spirituality has powerful health-giving benefits, especially in the area of lifestyle change, and that's the focus in LifeStart. We want to help you change things that will help you, at least in this case, reverse diabetes. Well, with that background, let me extend the dialogue just a little bit, because some of you tuning in may be saying, I don't have diabetes. Why am I watching this anyway? You need to be concerned. Everyone needs to be concerned about diabetes, and let me tell you 2 reasons why. Even if you don't have diabetes today, there's a very high likelihood you have a condition called pre-diabetes. That's right, pre-diabetes. Pre-diabetes is a state before you develop diabetes. You have higher blood sugars than optimal, but you have not yet reached the criteria for diabetes. Let me illustrate that with fasting blood sugar. If your fasting blood sugar is below 100, most people consider that simply normal. I actually consider normal below 80. And between 81 and 99, I consider that, higher normal. And once you get to 100, everyone says this is abnormal. We use the definition impaired fasting glucose. That's the terminology that's been used for years. But that didn't really stick with lay people. So we switched to the term of pre-diabetes. So if you're in the range of 100 to 125 for fasting blood sugars, that means the blood sugar when you wake up in the morning, then you have pre-diabetes. If your blood sugars are running 126 and above fasting, that meets the definition of diabetes. There's also criteria for blood sugar 2 hours after a meal. where you could also be in the pre-diabetic state. If you want more information, we have some additional details in our free resource. We have a study guide that goes along with this. You can access that at lifestartseminars.com. And by the way, if I went through that memory device, the LifeStart acronym too quickly, or even if you felt I went through it at just the right pace, but you want more information, you can also get a free ebook on LifeStart right there at lifestartseminars.com. Well, let's talk then about why you need to be concerned if you've got prediabetes. You may not even be aware of it, but prediabetes actually affects some 25 to 35% of the U.S. population looked at across the board. As we get into our 60s and beyond, you're talking about in the range of half the population with prediabetes. So we need to be concerned about this situation. The message is simply this: with the LifeStart principles, you can reverse the pre-diabetic state. In fact, what the research indicates is that 2 of those LifeStart principles, more than any other, are especially powerful in reversing the pre-diabetic state. It was looked at in what was called the Diabetes Prevention Program. What they found is simply this: take one element in LifeStart, and that's exercise. In that research, it was 30 minutes a day of moderate physical exercise. And then they combined that with the F and the L, the liquids and the foods, because that's where we get our calories. What they were focusing on is helping people lose 5 to 10% of their body weight. If that happened, if you just lost it, think about this now. If you weigh 200 pounds, let's say you're 5'2", your ideal weight maybe is as high as 120, you're a young lady, you weigh 200 pounds, and you say, wow, I got to lose 80 pounds. You don't have to lose the whole 80 pounds to get benefit. If you're 200 pounds, 5% weight loss would be how much? That's right, 10 pounds. So you drop those 10 pounds, and you do that, and you combine it with 30 minutes of exercise daily. Of course, the exercise is going to help with the weight loss. You've made some dietary changes likely as well, maybe left off the soft drinks. If I want to talk about one thing in this presentation, well, we'll talk about it right now. If you want to look at a cause of diabetes, many researchers are pointing their fingers at soft drinks, the high fructose corn syrup, the really concentrated amount of calories in those beverages. You just leave those things off, and you're going to get a tremendous aid in losing weight. And if you lose weight, it's going to help you whether you have diabetes, whether you have pre-diabetes, or whether you're in the group of people that are simply at risk for diabetes without even having pre-diabetes yet. So focus on things like water as a beverage, 0 calories in water, and stay away from those soft drinks, especially those that are sweetened with caloric sweeteners. Okay, since we're talking about it, I'll go one step further. Those artificial sweeteners, those 0-calorie soft drinks, they're not your friend either. Some of the research actually indicates that some people who drink those actually consume more calories after drinking them. And on top of that, it's just cultivating that same sweet tooth that got you into the problem that you have to begin with. If you want more information about behavior and behavioral change, we've got a lot of resources on the LifeStart website. One that I'd recommend is my DVD, Changing Bad Habits for Good. It speaks about some of these principles in general, how making clean breaks with bad habits is so powerful. But we need to just make sure we've got the whole picture here with prediabetes. In the Diabetes Prevention Program, 30 minutes of exercise a day, moderate physical activity, 5 to 10% weight loss, it led to a 58% decreased risk of developing diabetes. I mean, this is powerful. You can keep diabetes from ever coming into your household by simply following the LifeStart principles. 2 of the most important, you caught it, foods and exercise. And don't forget the liquids, because they're often a significant source of calories. Well, let's hasten on at this point and mention one other very important group that needs to be concerned. If you have a family history of diabetes, you are an individual who should be especially concerned about all that we're speaking about. And even if you don't have a family history, if you're carrying extra weight, if you're inactive, all of these things are risk factors for type 2 diabetes. And what we're trying to encourage you to do is simply catch the message, grab lifestyle, just hold on to it, however you grab it, and say, I am going to make these LifeStart changes so that I will not be affected by diabetes. Let me just make one other point here. You know, there are some people who have been genetically gifted with a very, very good pancreas. Their pancreas is so good that no matter how bad their insulin resistance, that means no matter how difficult it is for insulin to get its job done, the pancreas will just produce more and more insulin. They're going to never develop diabetes. But the problem is, if you're not following these LifeStart principles, and you're going to have more insulin resistance. Insulin's not going to work the way it should. And just because your pancreas can ramp up the insulin production, and you never get diabetes, just because you never develop diabetes, doesn't mean there aren't problems. Because insulin resistance, even if you never develop diabetes, tends to lower your good cholesterol. The HDL goes down. The bad cholesterol, the LDL, becomes more damaging. Another bad blood fat, triglycerides, rises. Are you hearing this? If you have problems with your blood fats, it may be the result of insulin resistance. Well, all of us need to be concerned. All of us need to be concerned about this very important epidemic that is affecting Americans. And whether we have diabetes, pre-diabetes, or whether we just are in danger of developing diabetes, we need to be concerned. The insulin-resistant state is a state that really sets us up for significant problems. And I want to encourage you to catch the important message from all that we're saying. We need to take action. Let's go now to a real living history example of how diabetes, insulin resistance, and related conditions can be kept at bay. We're going to look at a population that has some of the highest rates of diabetes in the world, and where researchers have learned the power of lifestyle perhaps as nowhere else. Some of you may know I host a weekly radio show called American Indian Living. I'm working with people of Native American ancestry on a regular basis. And you may not be surprised to know that one of the world's most diabetic-prone peoples are those of Native American descent. In the famous Strong Heart study that looked at Native Americans, looking at populations of Native Americans in 3 regions of the U.S., in the Dakotas, in Oklahoma, and in Arizona, they found in this study of adults that about 1/3 of the Native Americans living in North and South Dakota had diabetes. 40% of those in Oklahoma had the condition, and 2/3 of those in Arizona had diabetes. Why such staggering rates? Is it something just about Native Americans that they have to have diabetes? The evidence says no. Actually, some amazing data from the Gila River Indian Reservation, we'd say in the Phoenix area today, back around the turn of the last century, around 1900. We have good data that goes back then. Only a single case of diabetes among 4,000 individuals on that reservation. Some 40 years later, 21 individuals. Population had not changed much, but the incidence of diabetes, the prevalence of diabetes, the number of people affected had dramatically increased 20-fold, but it was still less than 1% of the population with diabetes. Today, if you go to the Gila River Indian Reservation, you look at those over 35 years of age, 50% will have diabetes. What this indicates is not a disease that is just from genetics. Yes, Native Americans in populations like the Pimas are genetically predisposed, but lifestyle is superimposed on it. How do we know? A wonderful study published back in the 90s in the journal Diabetes Care looked at people of Pima ancestry. You see, there are Pima Indians living in Arizona, as well as living in Mexico. We know by actual genetic measurements, by historical observations, by language similarities, these are cousins. But what is so fascinating is these two populations live very differently. The Native Americans of Pima ancestry living in Arizona are very much less active than their peers, their cousins in Mexico. Very physically active living in rural Mexico, those Pimas are. Then we look at diet. Diet is fascinating. High fiber diet. Very little in the way of animal products characterizing the diet of those in Mexico. High animal product intake in the Arizona Pimas, lots of animal fat in the diet, over 40% by some measurements. Are you starting to get the picture? Two populations, genetically similar, lifestyle very different, exercise different, dietary factors different. What do we see when it comes to diabetes? If you look at the Mexican Pima women in that study, about 1 in 10 of relatively young women in their 30s had diabetes. It was about 4 times that much in the Arizona Pima women. If you look at the Mexican Pima men in their 40s, only about 6% had diabetes compared to nearly 9 times as many, over 50% of the Arizona men with the condition. What all this tells us is that lifestyle largely drives diabetes. Yes, as one of my endocrinology professors told me in medical school, genetics can load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. Simple practices, as embodied in that LifeStart mnemonic, can make a difference in preventing diabetes from ever occurring. Eating less animal fat. Eating things that are lower in caloric density. That means more fruits and vegetables. Again, less animal products. Fasting. That's an application of temperance, not overeating. Fasting can be used under medical direction to help reset the metabolism in people with diabetes. Well, hopefully I've given you a window on what you can do to reverse the diabetic state. It's getting serious about your diet. It's getting serious about exercise. It's controlling stress. It's resting. It's, in short, LifeStart. I have a whole 4-hour series on reversing diabetes naturally. Of course, I couldn't condense it into a single 30-minute presentation, but I've given you all the tools you really need to make dramatic changes in your lifestyle. If you do have diabetes and are taking medication, before making any dramatic changes, talk with your doctor because your insulin needs will change. Even if you're not taking insulin, you may be on oral medications that need to be readjusted. But we've got more resources for you if you need them. Like I said, we've got the study guide available for you. We've got my more extensive DVD series. We've got the program notes that go along with this. And we've got more information about other programs that can make a difference. One last thing you won't want to forget. We even have personalized help. We've got a health coaching program on the LifeStart website. You tap into it all by going to lifestartseminars.com. For all of us with LifeStart, I'm Dr. David DeRose, wishing you the very best success in addressing diabetes and its risk factors.
All right, thank you. I thought this was a presentation that kind of flies through the whole topic. You can spend a lot more time than this to learn about the disease, but the advantage is not to make you all an expert, but to understand overall how this LifeStart is applied using diabetes as an example. Diabetes responds extremely well to LifeStart changes. And if you haven't talked to people or heard of people, there have been people here in this church who have done that. One person, he went down to Weimar. He had a bad case of diabetes, and he went there for a period of, they have 10-day programs to learn this LifeStart on the job, experiencing it with 3 healthy meals a day, exercising. So today I wanted to just give you more practical applications of this information so that you come out of here with more than just knowing more about the mnemonic. I think some of this information has kind of already been reviewed in the video, so I'm not going to go through the outline in great detail for that reason. You can just read where liquids have a role. I thought we would take a few minutes to talk about nutrition and exercise. Those, as he said, have a big role to play in, if you had to pick the most important part of lifestyle intervention, exercise and nutrition is the biggest one to understand. And so if you turn to page 2. We often want to just start with the core message, but if you meet somebody with diabetes, don't forget that first there's a need to have a relationship with that person. They won't care for what you have to say unless they see some results from it. That's a given. But first, at the top of the page, we're talking about interpersonal relationships. Somebody's going to take your word for it at first that this LifeStart is really as good as it is. They're doing that on faith, and that's based on your friendship with them. They may not have a lot of faith if they don't know you that well, but they might be at least curious and inspired if you let them watch this video, because he's talking about how two groups of people, the Pima Indians, how just those LifeStart principles in their lives have made a big difference as to which of them had diabetes and which ones did not. So we can't blame it all just on genetics. They both had that same genetic predisposition. But in 4 years of medicine, we learned a lot how to treat the symptoms. Doctors are experts at treating diabetes and all its complications, and then to treat the complications from the treatment of the diabetes. So it's not unusual to have a long list of medicines. So when they come into your office with a big shopping bag, there's a good chance they have diabetes, because they usually are on 12 medicines. These patients that you're going to meet are going to be happy to get rid of those medicines. Nobody takes medicines because they really like it, especially when they feel like there's all these side effects that they're fighting with. So I thought we need to touch on the applications. Let's say somebody is now coming to you and you're sharing with them about nutrition. They're very motivated. They've just seen their uncle lose his foot. They have a wound on their foot. They don't want to lose their foot. They're really motivated to try anything besides what the doctor's doing, because his wound won't heal. Diabetics don't heal well. High blood sugars keep your neutrophils, those are white blood cells, they keep them from doing their job. So this chronic smoldering wound infection just won't go away. And you have a hard time healing something that the immune system can't keep the right balance and kill off the bacteria. So these wounds will fester for years and years. They don't always turn into an osteomyelitis, but once that happens, there's a higher rate of amputation. So if this person now comes to you all gung-ho and listening, soaking up everything you're sharing on this outline, is that going to be safe? Well, we're going to touch on that. But the heart of this message of nutrition is whole food, whole plant foods, eaten whole. What I mean by that is if you can't define what they're eating as whole foods, eaten whole, then it's a refined food. Oil is a refined food. Maple syrup is a refined food. Whole foods are carrots, not carrot juice. That's been refined. So by understanding this principle of whole foods eaten whole, you don't have to have this long list of what's healthiest. That is the heart of that message. And that would mean that you are you treat oils as if they're toxic. You wouldn't put a lot of arsenic on your salad because you know that's going to have bad health effects. If a diabetic looks at any oil in his diet as toxic as arsenic, he will understand what it really does to the body. And so the oil that comes from animal products is just as bad as the oil that goes into your muffins or your brownies. It might be packaged different. You might not see the fat, but it's there in the products. Saturated fat has even a more powerful negative effect on the pancreas than vegetable oils. So you don't need as much to impair that. So that would be the heart of, if you want to turn somebody around, don't start talking about diabetic exchanges, which is what you get a long lecture on from the dietitian. Most dietitians out there that are trained in the regular schools of medicine, they don't tell you the diet that you need to reverse diabetes. This is not what they're taught in school. They'll tell you basically to eat a low-fat diet, but their definition of low-fat is not low-fat. Low-fat means you're not putting in any oil on your foods. That's the message that the diabetic needs to get. They focus on sugars, they focus on cookies and donuts, anything that has carbohydrates. But most of those foods, it's not the sugar that's the problem. I'm not saying that it's not a problem at all, but the biggest problem is the fat. Now, if somebody's really motivated and they say, yes, let's go fat-free for a week, what happens at the end of that week? If they haven't seen their doctor, they're going to be in serious trouble. They might be in the ER by the third or fourth day of going on a fat-free diet because they have to drop their medicines that they're on. So if you don't understand that risk, you'll think this is all good, and you're not doing them any good when they end up calling 911 because they fell down because they were hypoglycemic and passed out. So that's how powerful food is. That's how powerful a low-fat diet is. It doesn't take years to turn this disease around. Within just a few days, you will be dangerously low in your blood sugar from your insulin now working too well. And so what some of the doctors do is automatically, when they start on this program, they cut the insulin in half on day one before you've done anything, because it's better to run a little high than to bottom out on too much insulin. And so I want people to understand how powerful this low-fat diet is. It's more powerful than any drug that a doctor could prescribe. And so by understanding that, the safest course is to go in slow, small steps. Instead of making big changes, this patient first needs a visit to the doctor. So if the person's eager to make changes, you have to be their advocate and say, we want to do this in a safe way. So that means they have to have their doctor on board. If their doctor is not on board, then they need to find a doctor who is. If they can't get in to see their doctor for 3 months, there's a challenge. Okay, you don't want to start any of this nutrition and lifestyle changes on somebody who is on insulin until their doctor has explained to them how to stop taking the insulin, how to reduce the dose. If the patient is not told how to reduce the dose of these medicines, it's best to keep your mouth shut, because you will get that patient into serious trouble from good information, but they now keep doing what they're doing. And I think I've run into somebody here, they were running that. They were constantly snacking because their blood sugars kept diving down below normal between meals. Why? Because they had cut out the fat in their diet. But then, but they weren't told by their physician how to cut out the insulin that they were on. You need to back those off. And so this is all good information, but you have to do it in a safe way. So that's kind of just one way to avoid trouble. These people may have other issues, not just diabetes. They may have heart failure issues. Heart failure usually goes with diabetes if you have it long enough. And so there may be other concerns. Let's say you want to encourage them to drink 8 cups of water. That's not a problem unless their doctor told them already, hey, you can't drink very much water because they're fluid restricted because of congestive heart failure. So these medicines are like drugs. Lifestyle changes are just as effective as a drug. And I would say they are more powerful because none of these drugs cure the disease. Well, a lifestyle change can actually do that. Not everybody who has diabetes will end up completely cured, but the vast majority will be able to cut the insulin dose tremendously or stop it altogether. It usually depends on how long you've had the disease, whether how quickly and effectively you can reverse and be off all your medicines. And of course, exercise is just as important. The safest method is to exercise gradually and build up tolerance for it. so that they can get used to how exercise is affecting their blood sugar. Exercise burns calories, it uses up calories, it will lower your blood sugar. So it doesn't just do that, it also burns fat. And the more fat that you burn in your body, the more insulin sensitive you are. So your blood sugars will go down because of use by the exercise itself, and also because you're becoming more insulin sensitive by the exercise. So it has double benefits. Okay. I thought we would take 10 minutes here to just role play. Rob and I would just act like a patient and a doctor, and these are supposedly, we're going to try and create some questions that you're likely to experience with your patients so that you can have some basic understanding of how to keep that interaction safe, so that you're not a physician but you don't feel overwhelmed with wondering what to do when they start asking questions. Do you just say, well, I can't talk to you about that? You know, we need to have some experience with that. So I thought I could present Rob with some questions here, and he could be the friend that's come over. I have the diabetes, let's say, and I'm motivated to make all these changes. So in fact, I'm not very happy with the physician that I have. He hardly gets to see me. I only get to talk to him for about 2 minutes. And so, how about you be my doctor?
This is where you run the other way. You know, it's actually, Erwin, you'd be amazed how many times I actually hear that. You know, they're just really not interacting. They go and more time spent typing on the computer than actually establishing eye contact with you. And I'm sure you probably felt that way a little bit. So what is it that you don't like about your physician?
Well, he just gives me a bunch of medicines, writes a bunch of prescriptions. He doesn't explain anything about the medicine. And I've got all these issues to talk about, but he doesn't have time to listen.
What kind of issues do you ever just take a list in when you see your physician?
I do. I have it's about 3 pages long. It's all handwritten, and he doesn't even want to read it. He says, "Oh, I only have time to take one of those," and he gives me 1 minute to talk about the most important thing.
You know, that's 3 pages. Wow, pretty, you know, overwhelming. Because you know your physician doesn't have much time to spend with you. Do you ever prioritize which one you're going to target before you go talk to him?
Well, sometimes, but usually he thinks of something that's more important than the one I want to talk about.
Oh, so you may not agree with him. I see how this goes. Yeah. So have you thought about finding another physician?
Yeah, sure, but it's hard to get some good physicians. They're all booked up.
It is. And you know, in watching the video today, I think you're probably pretty excited about, you know, the role that lifestyle can make in your life.
I'm on board. I want to do something different. I'm not going to have this foot amputated.
How do you feel your physician would? Do you think he would agree with this?
Well, I don't know. I haven't talked to him about this. It's something that's just come up now.
So what do you think, class? Does he need to add that to the top of his list? I think that'd be a pretty important, you know, place to start. And in all seriousness, I think all of us have patients that they really are feeling hopeless and helpless and overwhelmed because most of their caloric intake at breakfast is in the form of a pill and a list of medications, and the frustration levels just keep going higher and higher and higher because they're not seeing the positive results that Dr. DeRose has alluded to on this video. And you're gonna be working with a lot of frustrated people. We have frustrated folks here in our congregation, you know, which is really sad. You know, and that means that we've got to continue to work to make sure that we're helping folks understand that there's other ways. and we've got to do so wisely, as you've alluded to. So back to the role play, I would definitely have you move that to the top of your discussion list, because I think that's going to be a very important discussion to have with your physician, because you have got to have a physician that you feel like you can communicate with and you can be on the same page. Incredibly, incredibly important.
So when can I start this LifeStart?
So right after you see your physician, like has been discussed, I think it's so imperative. If I have you start eating more vegetables today, if you don't eat any vegetables and I have you start eating vegetables, that's going to have a significant impact on not only blood sugars, but every aspect. If you're on blood pressure medications, and we can talk about all the different medications. Having your blood pressure drop on top of blood sugars, I got to tell you, you're not going to feel so good.
Well, that's good to know. I want to just stop taking all these medicines because they don't make me feel good.
And of course, I'm going to encourage you, don't do that. Let's get your physician on board, and let's establish that communication and that relationship with your physician that's going to help get you feeling better.
So, what do I need to ask my physician?
Pretty much, I think, what would be very important is to actually find out how he feels about you making positive lifestyle changes and working on reduction of medications. And you're going to find out right away. Like you said earlier, there's not a lot of physicians that are trained in actually the reduction of medications. But I gotta tell you, it's pretty exciting as you go and you go talk to your physician. He puts you on a sliding scale on your blood sugars. He gives you some very defined parameters on your blood pressure. Gives you a game plan as to how to go about reducing your medications so that you don't start getting orthostatic hypotension or when you stand up, start feeling dizzy and lightheaded. We don't want to increase fall risk. We don't want to cause more problems, but we want to start correcting some of the problems that we already have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So I think that, go ahead, Al.
I'd like to
tell
you about Lori. When we first came here, Lori couldn't hardly walk. We got out of Arizona because of her health. And she just went to the doctor and...
Oh, I came to the lifestyle change class here.
Okay.
And it saved my life. First, I was just doing the water every day with a lemon and the whole thing. And then I decided, well, I keep telling me I've got to do exercise. Well, I could not walk from my parking lot from the apartment to the parking lot without being worn out, without a cane. Anyway, I said, well, I've got to walk. I walked about not even a fourth of a block, and I said, I can't do this, I hurt. And then I got mad at myself. I went back. I got mad at myself and decided if I had to stop with this cane 20 times, I was going around that block. And pretty soon I was going miles every day, and it literally has saved my life.
Mm-hmm.
60 pounds later.
She goes to the gym and she runs for an hour on the treadmill.
Praise the Lord.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. I think you will meet many people who will be making this turnaround. And I think the greatest example is people in this congregation here who have health concerns, health issues, who are applying this. You're the best example when you're sharing it because you've experienced it. You can inspire hope. And so we want to inspire change and do it in a safe way. This illustration shows how it's going to be a partnership. You don't assume the role of a medical person, but you can encourage. And so if you look at the back of your handout, actually I added this point to the last page, page 9, and that is to ask more questions. It's not on your outline, but you could write this in. And it's simply, let's see, do I have that? Yeah. It says, ask leading questions rather than lecturing. Rob has used health coaches in a powerful way in the work he was doing with his patients. And I think this is something that we need to adopt and foster and learn that art. A health coach is not somebody who is very smart about all this medical information. I mean, they should know this in the back of their mind so they can be safe. But their greatest skill is asking questions. By asking questions, you're not lecturing somebody who already knows this stuff. Most diabetics know more than they let on. They like to claim ignorance about many things because they have addictions. But they do benefit from having a friend. The best friends are ones who are going to listen, not to tell you what you already really don't want to hear. But by listening, they're going to be more open to a relationship, to sharing. So you could do it as simple as, how's your day going? How's your energy level? How's your wound doing? And just becoming informed as a layperson, asking many questions about the details of their health. By doing that, you are becoming informed as to, are they following this? Because if they're making good progress in applying what you shared, they will show signs of it. You can ask how their blood sugars have been, how their blood pressures have been, what their last doctor's visit did. Did their cholesterol numbers come down? All these are different ways for you to be informed. Are they working with you? Do those numbers reflect it? So you don't have to lecture them. It's more important to keep a relationship open with these people and become interested in their whole person. And in the process, you will find out usually what's keeping them back. Because people make small starts and then they usually relapse. So in this art of questioning, you become their health coach, not to lecture them, but to simply discover through various kind questions what's going wrong, what's derailing it. And usually in the back of a person's mind, they know what they're doing wrong. You can just say, are you applying these principles? Are you finding that you're having a hard time following through with what you've learned? You don't have to observe it. People will usually reveal when they're messing up. Because in the back of their mind, they want help, but usually you're a diabetic because you're also an addict to that lifestyle that promotes diabetes. So you're not going to just deal with somebody who needs information. You're also dealing with somebody who has lack of motivation to do something successfully. They have chosen a lifestyle through their addiction that tends to sabotage all the efforts the doctor has tried to get them to be well. So don't feel like it's going to be an easy road. You've got to incorporate all of these areas of life start, including trust in a divine power. Because to break a person's addictions to these unhealthful habits, they're going to have to say a prayer or two for their divine power to overcome their addictions. If they don't see any need for that, they'll learn the hard way that those addictions are much stronger than they give it credit for. I have a question back there.
I used to listen to Rob all the time, and I used to drink 64 ounces of water a day, and maybe then some, and a girlfriend went to see him. It was even more when we started reading the literature. It worked. I mean, really worked. A big part, I think, of why it worked is because I was also in a different environment. It didn't have the issues that this environment has right now. And then, meanwhile, after Rob gave, the advice that worked so well, they had that tsunami over in Japan where they dumped all that
Fukushima.
Radiation into the ocean. And I don't know, there was some other issue shortly after that. I don't remember where it was, but they were like in chemical suits up to their chin in water. And my water, after I drink it, it's like really dehydrating and very dry. one day, and I was vomiting, thereafter, and then the doctors on TV said that should be a waterless diet. And I'm like, nothing really works. So I went back to milk, and that helps, but that's a lot of milk. And then you go juice, well, then that's a lot of sugar. What are you supposed to do? And then I said, okay, well, I'm going to do aloe vera juice, which has helped a whole lot, but that's, what, $6.50 a gallon at Walmart, and you go somewhere else, it's much more than that. And on top of that, I was on the internet, and it supposedly causes some kind of deficiency. I think it's magnesium, but I'm not sure. So I'm like, I was going to go out to the thing out the county and talk to UC Davis, try to get the colleges together to start taking out the 307 chemicals that are in the water. Why they can't get companies to say, okay, well, I'll take one of the 307 things that could be in the water, figure out how to put them together, and start selling the things so they can actually get 0% contamination. But what is the recommendation when the water system screwed up?
Well, the health concerns about water are real. They do have standards to keep it safe, but not everyone agrees with the standards. I think most people have greater health damage to their body from having too little water than having toxic exposure to these low-level toxins that are in the water. All toxins have a similar reaction to your body. They are stress, and most stresses end up stimulating your immune system. And they've showed that in these low-level toxins, like we're talking about in drinking water, in over 4,000 experiments with yeast, with tissue culture, with bacterial cultures, they've showed that all these low-level toxins actually have health-promoting features, not harmful effects. And that's true for radiation as well. At low levels, our immune system is stimulated to mount a positive healing response to that toxin, to that radiation, whatever that is harmful in our environment. Our liver is very effective at getting rid of those toxins. So by having foods, healthy foods, feeding our liver, we're aiding the body in reducing those harmful effects to where they should be. And that's why they believe people like radiologists live longer, because they're exposed to low-level radiation. If you have two experiments where you have bacteria, one where you have given these bacteria low-level toxins in their water, and the other where they have distilled water, you're going to find the ones that have low-level toxins actually live longer. And so people don't understand that low-level toxins are sometimes misunderstood, and they're also a big dollar industry. They can sell you all sorts of equipment, all sorts of books and lectures and seminars to prey on your fears. But all those experiments, I'm talking about 4,000 of them, that have been summarized in the literature, all point to the opposite, that we need to have more faith in God and not stress out about low-level toxins. Now, if it's a toxin that you have some control over, and the toxins we're talking about are things you put in your mouth that you can really decide, this one's not going in my fridge. Those are the ones that you can easily control. The ones that are in our drinking water are much harder to control, and they're at very low levels. And I'm sharing this big detail because I see that question come up and up, where people are stressed unnecessarily about like radiation, because I'm a radiologist, and so at my work they worry about radiation. And yet at low levels, bacteria actually live longer if you expose them to low-level radiation. And human tissue culture cells do the same. So people's fears about these low levels in their environment is promoted by the press, but it's not promoted by good science. Good science doesn't say that you will get a shorter lifespan, you will suffer from all these diseases from that low-level exposure. Now the high level exposures is completely different. I don't know if my battery died, but it sounds quieter. Can people still hear me back there? Okay. So I hope that answers your question so that you don't feel like you have to pay great amounts of your money to buy this extra expensive water distiller, just so that you can avoid that low-level exposure. I mean, if you've got money to burn, I'm not saying that's not a bad thing, but I don't think that's the best way of spending your money. It would be better to spend your money on healthful groceries that you can feed good things to your liver that can now detoxify all those things in our water.
I'd like to second what Erwin is saying. The devil would love to get us so distracted with this minutia that we miss the big opportunity. And the big opportunity is to do simple things. And God is so loving and so good that He's not going to let you be poisoned by the trivia that's in your water. But He will let you be poisoned if you choose the Pepsi-Cola, because there's a ton of bad stuff in there. And so try and keep things simple and manageable. Don't be overwhelmed with what you can't control. Take full advantage of what you can control, and then trust God that He is going to make the difference, and that if you get something in your water that may be there in a small amount, then He's going to take care of that for you.
Yes. So I think we're going to the last part of we've already started the question and answer. So if other people have questions about the overall theme is how to apply LifeStart principles so that you could see yourself if, let's say your neighbor had this condition of diabetes. Could you see yourself making a friendship with your neighbor and starting a dialogue with them, like you've learned today? Is there some question that comes in your mind of something that you would like us to discuss?
Hi, Erwin. I just wanted to ask, if a person has a neighbor, the neighbor starts talking about the diabetes, and the neighbor has been going to bed late, skipping breakfast, coming to you and talking to you, how do you approach that in a way that will be politically correct, if that's even nice these days to even say political correct? It's kind of a dirty word. But to just say what you think would be best for that patient. Rob's been doing this for years, so I don't know who answers it, you or Rob, but I'll leave it. But I think there needs to be some sort of,
Sure.
first step.
It can be overwhelming. I'm not an expert on this, but this is sort of my passion, to do LifeStart training, because it's not something I learned during med school. It's something I learned after medicine schooling was finished, in response to the health conditions my dad had. So each of us finds a passion and can reach out to those people with that information. And it starts in small ways. If somebody has a disease, you're not going to make a huge change overnight, like we talked about. First, you need to introduce the idea that all of these things are reversible. But then once they maybe you've let them see this video and you've planted the idea that whatever they have, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, all the low energy level, those are given. Every diabetic will have those. Maybe you can ask them, have they ever had that yearning to have the energy they had before they had diabetes? Most people like to have that energy, so they don't just sit around all day. And you say, with these lifestyle changes, this is all possible. Encourage them to talk to their physician. And once you've got the green light from their physician, the physician has gotten a visit with them, and not just talk to them. The physician actually has to know how powerful LifeStart is at reversing the disease, so that they have been told, So it might be useful to write down some questions that they need to ask the physician, because they may forget, as most of us do, when you only have 1 minute to spit it out. So the questions might be something like, can you tell me how to reverse or reduce the insulin that I'm on so that I can back it off as my blood sugars keep falling? So that we call that titration, or where they're given these ranges, and so they have more control over the insulin that they're getting, instead of just doing exactly the same amount before each meal. That would be the first step. The second would be to have more frequent visits as they're making these changes, so that these other medicines, like high blood pressure medicines, can also be reduced. And the patient needs parameters on that, how to, which ones to reduce, how much to reduce. So they need to be given that kind of direction from the physician. And then they're probably going to not be that motivated. You're going to spend time in this friendship on things that they're willing to do. They may not be ready to give up some of their foods. So you focus on the worst offenders. The foods that are the worst offenders would be the high fat, chips, pastries. It's not the carbohydrates, and that's what they're always focusing on. And if you haven't figured out, most diabetics are carbohydrate addicts. They love carbohydrates, but they don't just eat it in the form of sugar. They eat it with sugar mixed with fat. That's what chips and pastries are. It's tastier, of course, and it's more addicting. So focus on those foods. You might find that just by reducing the amount that they're consuming of those, they're going to see their blood sugars improving and their energy level improving enough so that they'll take the next step and take it more serious. Even just like he was focusing on 10-pound weight loss, that's enough to make them feel more energy. So you don't have to cure the disease before they're going to actually be on board. They're going to have these small improvements along the way. And so rather than try and just give them a fire hose worth of all this good information, spoon feed that person. Find out where they're likely to see the greatest benefits. Any food with fat in it is, well, donuts, of course, is not the carbohydrates, it's the fat that's the problem. And most diabetics always think the carbohydrates is the problem with the donuts. It's the fat. And once they get that concept, they'll realize that most of the food that they're eating is that fat-sugar combination.
One quick thing I can't let get by, and that's the breakfast. I got to tell you, and those of you that have been, how many years ago was that, Lori? I'm sitting here going, the Sabbath afternoons that we would...
Probably 6.
6 years? Yeah, time goes racing by. But, I think most folks that have ever been to any of the lectures or Sabbath afternoon meetings or anything, that, when we start talking about lifestyle, New Start, Life Start, we have to understand that in the world in which we live, breakfast is going to be little to nothing, lunch is going to be something fast, and then dinners are going to be massive. And as we're reversing that wedge, we get a larger breakfast. We end up with a dinner that's fit for a pauper. We just, and I think many conversations can be started and relationships developed just simply by saying, just talking about the little breakfast thing. Going, wow, there's so many studies. Tufts University has released multiple studies on this topic. Everything they've looked at, from cardiovascular disease to diabetes, the impacts of breakfast on blood sugars, to even kids, how they perform in school. And it's mind-blowing when you've got a neighbor that doesn't do much in the way of breakfast. You just start going, wow, you're gonna love to look at one of these studies, and increasing the metabolism, and the list goes on and on and on. So I could spend the rest of the afternoon on that. So pretty fun.
I wanted to just address your question with this. The power of questions is awesome. It is the most powerful thing that you can do. And if you read through your scriptures, you'll find God asking people questions. And when you find Christ in his ministry, he asks people questions. Questions are very, very non-defense generating. And so if you come and you give somebody a statement and a fact, they'll glaze over on you. But if you ask them a question, then in their mind, they start to work on that answer. And we're put together in ways that we want to start to answer these questions. And now you're getting them to participate in their own treatment. And that's powerful. Now you have somebody on board. Now you have a student. And then they'll start to do their research. And so ask the Holy Spirit to guide your mind, because the Hebrew way of thinking is to ask questions. And when you ask questions, then you will start to be able to walk them into a path that will get them this kind of health. And if you look at the internet, almost every internet site you go to has frequently asked questions. That's because the power of question is so powerful.
Yeah. I second that. Couldn't agree more. And that's the best relationship and friend to have. If you think of all the friends you like being around, it's the ones that enjoy asking you more questions, taking an interest in you, and spending less time talking to you about what you need to do, what you need to know. So questions is a very therapeutic way to draw a person out. If sometimes we have fears that the person we're going to share with is going to be negative about the whole process, we don't have to fix the person for themselves. Sometimes you plant the seed, and it might take some new event. Maybe that takes after a year of just keeping in touch with your neighbor, he's now been given the ultimatum that it's time for amputation. Or his last test, he failed his driver's test because he can't see anymore because of macular degeneration. What do you tell somebody? Can that be reversed? Maybe now he's motivated. For some people, they have to have some serious losses in their lives before they are motivated to do something different. Otherwise, they are so comfortable doing what they've done for so many years. And it's not for us to motivate somebody else. We can plant a seed, but in the end, that person needs to finally take initiative and choose. And so sometimes the best we can do is keep a low-level friendship. When finally the timing is right, they will all of a sudden turn around and say, yes, I'm hearing you. I'm ready for that change. And rather than to try and beat their door down and thinking that it's on us to convince them what they need to do to be healthy. You know, they need to be part of that team. If they're not on board, no amount of good therapy, no amount of skill as a physician is going to fix what they need to do for themselves.
Is this working?
Yes.
I just want to know if there's somebody that you're talking with and they're healthy. Actually, they have no problems or any medication or anything like that, and you're visiting with them, and so you ask them, would they like to keep their health like they are? But you know that their lifestyle is really bad, but they still haven't got to where they need pills or anything.
Yeah.
Would it be dangerous to tell them, you know, like you said, could they take off all their bad food right away? They could, couldn't they? Because they're not on any medicine.
That's the best time to change, is when you're not on any medicine.
They don't need to worry about any of that. They can
That's right.
So you could tell them, they could take the whole message, right?
There's a good... I've noticed from experience, when I try and share too much too soon, because I'm passionate about it, it may be overwhelming for that person to receive it. And then in the end, they feel overwhelmed and may not want to come back and hear more, because it just seemed a little too much too soon. So, I'm all for it, but I think you pray that the Holy Spirit will give you wisdom, and it's better to give it in small amounts.
Even if they say I'm on
Well, if they're on board, I would go with it. But at the same time, you have to get a sense. Some personalities see change as if the older we are, change is a struggle. So they might say they're on board, but a week later they really regret that they had said that. They want to do their old habits. They're not ready for that change. And so just knowing human nature, it's sometimes easier to spoon-feed people these lessons in small amounts and keep that friendship open so that you are able to come back on frequent visits and keep asking questions about how those last changes were going rather than to do it all overnight.
You know, Irwin, I use a couple of terms regularly. One is meaningful, one is sustainable. And I think somebody that's making drastic changes in their lifestyle, there's no documented mortality risk of from chocolate withdrawal. However, if they go from eating 5 candy bars a day to nothing, is that something that's sustainable? And so really what we're trying to do is actually promote a lifestyle here, not create the diet mentality.
So I think to support your goal, if you give somebody resources, a website, and you can look at some of those that I put in here. Nutrition Facts is a wonderful resource for somebody who has lots of medical questions and wants to do a lot of learning on that. You can share some books that have meant something for you. For me, the China study is a good start. And a person can just fly through there and soak up a lot of information, but it somehow is different when a person reads it than when you are lecturing them all afternoon about that subject, because they can pick it up when they're ready for it. So these resources can be your help. You don't have to do all the sharing. You can simply direct them. And if you're busy or you don't have that much time during your visits, that's the best you can do is just scribble down or hand out a list and just circle the one that you think most applies to that moment. If they have internet access, Nutrition Facts is a way to have them understand more about diabetes, more than any physician would tell them about it. And go ahead.
I liked, the question thing is awesome, asking someone if they're even interested. Are you interested in changing, what you're doing? And I love, Rob is always, how is that working for you? That's one of his great questions. But, and giving someone a resource, Tom, as many of you all know, is an exercise fanatic, and for years, just about every day, he would ask me to go exercise. And of course, I would want to slap him or, be very angry with him. But until he actually gave me a resource in which he purchased a personal training for me. And initially, I was very upset. I thought, you just purchased a toaster for me for my birthday. That was, anyway. But I took that first step, and because I was basically too cheap. It's like you either use it or you lose it. You lose, a chunk of money. But, yeah, you knew that I was cheap. So I went. And so just encouraging someone, giving them a resource, and encouraging them to take just the first step and then back off, because finally he learned to back off. And maybe many of us need to learn to back off on someone. Give them a resource and let them have the epiphany about change.
Yeah.
Because it's not someone else's epiphany that has to happen. He might have known that I needed to exercise, but until I picked that up, that change was not going to happen. And of course, now I exercise regularly. I'm sorry?
How many years?
It's almost 10 years now.
Wow.
I've been exercising, and I will say that before I was not at all. Never. And so change is possible.
Yeah.
And I think we need to really remember that. Even as we get older, change is still possible. And as reluctant as we all are, and as sometimes we just want to dig our feet in and just say, stop telling me to do that, stop asking me to do it. But and we all know that we have to change, right? Everyone has some area that they have to change. We all know where those areas are. But we each have to grab that epiphany on our own. Mm-hmm. And so just giving that to someone, and then, even if he had encouraged me, it depends on your relationship with that person. If he had continually said, "Oh, that's great, you're doing a great job," I probably would have, my personality would have been maybe to stop encouraging me so much, like don't press so much that you're antagonizing again. But it's an art. It's an art that everyone needs to learn, while encouraging someone.
You hit it on the head. In these relationships that you will have, you'll learn through some failures. Your best efforts will sometimes fall flat, and you think about it and you realize what went wrong. But you can't even discover that if you make no effort at all in pursuing some interactions. So in these relationships, helping people, even with your best intentions, it won't always turn out well. And like you've discovered, timing is important. And we don't know what someone else's timing is. And so the Holy Spirit can enlighten us at times to know what to say, but it's best for us not to try and become the Holy Spirit for that person. We can be instruments in God's hands, but not take over God's role. So I think we're running out of time. I'd be happy to entertain more questions for those who want to stay a little longer and ask more questions. But for those who feel like they have some other commitments or activities they need to be at, I think we'll close with a word of prayer. And then for those who want to stay, I'll stay a little longer for your questions if you so want to. Okay, let's bow our heads. Gracious Father, thank you for your gracious love and showing us how much you love us, that you want us to have abundant life, whole health, and you've given us the tools and methods, and not only for our own life, but to share this wonderful gift with those around us. May we learn effective ways to do that, encourage each other with these wonderful tools, so that not only are people healthier, but happier, and we can make this community a better place because of our presence and because of your power in their lives. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.